So Srila Prabhupada appeared in this world in Calcutta on the 1st of September 1896. His father, Gaur Mohande, Srila Prabhupada used to describe him as a pure devotee. His mother was called Rajani, and she loved Srila Prabhupada. He was like the pet of everybody. So Prabhupada describes that Gaur Mohande used to always, every day, read Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita. He chanted on japa and he worshipped his deities. So this is the atmosphere that Srila Prabhupada grew up in. When he was first born, an astrologer did a reading, and he said, at 70 years, he will become a great exponent of religion. He will cross the ocean and spread God consciousness all over. I mean, actually, he also said he'll open 108 temples, and pretty much Srila Prabhupada did everything. So Gaur Mohande was very pleased, and he therefore wanted to really reinforce devotional characteristics. For example, he had Abhay Charan Day, as he was called, fearless at the lotus feet, instructed in Mridanga. So his mother was saying, why does he have to get Mridanga lessons? No, Gaur Mohande really wanted that he would be a Vaishnava, and this was very important for him. So also daily they would visit Radha Govinda Temple, which was just kind of in the next block. They would go, and Srila Prabhupada described one time, he said, I sometimes used to stand there for hours and look at Radha Govinda. They were very beautiful in a dancing pose, beautiful brass deities, and Srila Prabhupada was very in love with those deities. So when it was time for Srila Prabhupada to go to school, he didn't want to go to school, so Gaur Mohande was always very indulgent, but Rajani was a little more strict. So she hired a man, and that man would tie Srila Prabhupada around the waist and drag him to school until he became willing to go by himself. He was very fascinated by Jagannath Puri. He always used to wonder about Jagannath Puri and the Jagannath deities there. And in these days, there were celebrations of Rath Yatra in various cities around India on the day of Rath Yatra. So Srila Prabhupada actually asked his father if he could have a Rath Yatra cart. And by Krishna's grace, because it was actually too expensive to get one, to buy one already, buy one and prepare one. But an old lady saw Abhay crying one day, and she said, oh, I have one you can take. And so father and son modified it. They put on the pillars, and Abhay Charan helped him do all this and put on the canopy. But Rajani put down her foot at Abhay Charan making fireworks for the day. So the Rath cart got bought, purchased, made, and for 8 days Srila Prabhupada had a Rath Yatra. The neighbourhood ladies watched with fascination all this, and they helped by cooking preparations, and he and the other children would pull the Rath cart through the streets of Calcutta for 8 days and celebrate, offer prasadam and celebrate. He also requested, his father actually bought him some deities when he was 7 years old, and he worshipped those deities very sincerely and very lovingly. And he had an assistant, his sister, Bhavatarini. We used to call her Pishima. So together they would worship the deities. And the other brothers would say, how come you're so worshipping the deities so much? You won't have a long life, you'll have a short life. And Abhay and Bhavatarini would say, we don't care. And they just worship their deities to their heart's content. And he would put them to sleep every day. He would dress them. He would offer offerings to them, put them to sleep. So right from the start, this is the upbringing of Srila Prabhupada. He went to college. He actually explained about his father. He said, Srila Prabhupada said about his father, I learned everything from my father except the value of printing transcendental literature, which I learned from my spiritual master. Other than that, everything He learned from his father, and he was very indebted. In one of the books, he's dedicated it to his father because of this. So he would also, Guru Mohande would invite sadhus to his house every day, and he would ask them, please bless my son so that he can get the blessings of Srimati Radharani. Later on we find out that Srila Prabhupada wasn't terribly impressed with these sadhus because a lot of them smoked ganja and So he went to college for 4 years. Oh, his father actually got him private lessons in Bengali and Sanskrit. If we wonder how Srila Prabhupada was so expert in Sanskrit, once again his father was preparing him. And his mother said, he's going to be a lawyer. We want him to go to the West and be a lawyer. Why does he need to know Sanskrit? But his father insisted. So he was preparing him. Went to college for 4 years. He passed all his exams. Oh, he went to a Scottish school. Yeah, Scottish church. And anyway, there were various incidents there where he could see that the teachers were atheistic. So after he attained his degree at college, because he was following Mohandas Gandhi at the time, he renounced that certificate. That was what the free British people were trying to become free of the British, and so many of the young men, they would gain their degree from college and then burn it. They just to sort of push the point that we want India to be free and not have to have your qualifications thrust upon us. So in 1922, one of his friends said, there's a wonderful sadhu visiting here in Calcutta. I want you to go and meet him. At this time, Srila Prabhupada said, I don't think too much of sadhus. We had sadhus at our place when we were young. I was not impressed with them. But his friend begged him, please come and see this sadhu. I think you'll see he's different. So this was on the roof of a building in Calcutta. So as they ascended the stairs, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was sitting on the roof, and they came towards him and they offered respects. And as they got up, just as they were getting up from offering respects, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta spoke to them. And he said, you are educated young men. Why don't you preach Lord Chaitanya's message throughout the whole world? Just imagine you walk in and see this sadhu and then just getting up and go and preach her over the whole world. So Prabhupada said, who will hear your preaching, your philosophy? We are an indebted nation because of the English. We have to get rid of the English first. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, this is way beyond that. These things are temporary, but the spirit soul is eternal. It's our eternal dharma to serve Krishna. So it's got nothing to do with party politics. They're just temporary. And they spoke for 2 hours, and Srila Prabhupada was actually astounded at his boldness, because nobody else was preaching like this. So he was bowled over, and when he went downstairs with his friend, they were talking about how impressive Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is. And Srila Prabhupada said, he's wonderful. The message of Lord Chaitanya is in the best hands. And Prabhupada described it, at that time he actually, in his heart, he took Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to be his guru. He said, not formally, but in my heart. So his father arranged a good job for him. He was working as a department manager in a pharmaceutical company, and he travelled a little at that time, but he was engaged in family life. He was married, he had several children, and but that meeting with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was very important for him, and he never forgot it. So for his business at one time he moved to Allahabad for pharmaceutical sales, and at that time he freely associated with the Gaudiya Math. They would come to his pharmacy. Oh, Abhay Babu, how are you going? Would you like to come to some program? And he would go to all their preaching programs, and his attraction for these saintly brahmacharis and their preaching and the whole philosophy was increasing and increasing. He finally got initiated in 1933, 11 years later. I'd like to read something. This is a book about Srila Prabhupada from those who knew him before he went to America. And it's very wonderful and insightful to hear about our Guru Maharaj, whom we only knew as a senior, pure devotee living, traveling the world, but they knew him in his earlier days, so it's a really special book. So, Srila Prabhupada, a friend to all, and one of my god sisters, Mula Prakriti, she got that together. A lot of them were sort of passing away as she was interviewing them, I think in between interviews and editing they'd have passed away, so it was wonderful that she sort of caught what she caught. So this is from Dr. O.B.L. Kapoor. He says, "We were both initiated by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Abhay Charanaravinda Prabhu took Diksha at Sri Rupa Gaudiya Math, this was in Allahabad, in 1933, after waiting over 10 years to do so. We would often talk about our Gurudev, as disciples do. He was extremely dedicated to him. He told me many times that Gurudev had ordered him to preach in the West. He would often mention this with grave seriousness. At that time in Allahabad, he appeared to be a humble, ordinary devotee. He treated me just like a good friend. And because he was a chemist and preparing various formulas, he would sometimes get this Dr. O.B.L. Kapoor to try them. So once Prabhupada had this tonic for brain concentration, so he tried it on Dr. O.B.L. Kapoor, and he said, "Oh, this is pretty good." And then he said, "Abhayada, I'm happy you gave me this tonic, but why don't you give me the tonic you use yourself?" "Which tonic is that?" he asked. I replied, "The tonic that helps you to be such an advanced Vaishnava, to give such wonderful Harikatha and Sankirtan, the tonic of Krishna Prem, which you use secretly." In a humble way he smiled and said, "Oh, I am working on that, but I have not yet been able to procure it." He was indeed a very deep and sweet Vaishnava even then. But later he said one thing which was an indication of his future plans for service to our Gurudev. He said, "About that tonic we discussed, I have not yet been able to manufacture that tonic, but I do know the formula." I said, "Please, let me know the formula if it's not a secret." At that time he said, "This is the formula. Shinadapi Shunichina Tarorafi Shihishina Manina Manadina Kirtaniyastari." It's not a secret, he said. Someday I will preach it all over the world. So, he only met his Guru Maharaj about a dozen times. One time he met him in Radhakund. This is in 1935, bearing in mind that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta left the next year, so it was an important meeting, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta at the time was distressed because his senior devotees, there was some fighting going on about the quarters and about the facilities, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta felt very distressed about that. And he said to Srila Prabhupada, Abhay Charanarvindam, he said, I can't find it, but anyway, he said, "There will be fire in the mutt." He said, it would be better to take all the marble from the walls of the temple and sell them and print transcendental literature. He said, if ever you get money, print books. So this was a very strong instruction that Srila Prabhupada kept in his mind, and we know that right from the beginning, before he even went to America, but a huge part of his mission was to print transcendental literature because of this direct instruction from his guru. So, so he was preaching here and there. His wife was not very interested. He was in Jhansi. He actually initiated a disciple, Acharya Prabhaka Mishra. He was a Sanskrit scholar. So he did initiate one disciple there in India. But others, he would ask so many men, can you give me one son? But nobody was interested. They wanted their sons to be, making money. And so he returned from Jhansi to Calcutta, but his wife again showed no interest. And she used to drink tea. So Srila Prabhupada, of course, strictly following it. And actually she did take initiation from one of his godbrothers, his wife. But she wasn't very strict. And Srila Prabhupada used to say, why are you drinking tea? And then he said to her, well, it's tea or me. And she said, oh, well, I'll have to give up my husband then. And then she made the great blunder of one day when there was bargaining going on at that time. Someone came around with some tea biscuits and she bartered by giving him Srila Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavata. So that was it. Srila Prabhupada knew it's time to go. So he left. And in the 50s, he was quite alone, and he would stay with some people that he met with his preaching, or he'd stay in one of the mats, moved here and there, or stay in free dharamshalas. It was a time of poverty. The 50s and halfway into the 60s, Srila Prabhupada did suffer poverty. He didn't always have food, he didn't always have warm clothing. But he wrote and he preached. He had a fire in him to write and preach. So he started his Back to Godhead in Calcutta in 1944 during the wartime. There was a lot of deprivation and it was really difficult for him to find paper at the time. Still, he managed. And each month he printed Back to Godhead, and then that became fortnightly. So while he was, he had no living quarters, he was just moving around, still somehow or another, he would just write his Back to Godheads and distribute them here and there. So it's described that, one time, the printer said to him, "Habai, Babu, why do you do this? You don't even have a jacket. You suffer so much." And he knew, he was interviewed later, he said he knew that when Srila Prabhupada would come to him in the morning and print, that he would not have eaten because he didn't have the money. He used the money for printing. And he said, "Why are you going through so much hardship?" And Srila Prabhupada said to him, "It is my mission." So his writing, however, was not strident or fanatical. You could think, well, he would be, there would be some sort of, a strong sort of push, but no, Srila Prabhupada kept it very logical, kept to completely to Shastra. His writing was very relevant, and it was done with authority, Vedic authority. So full of logic and very beautiful. Those early Back to Godheads, they're very strong, but they are beautifully written, of course. He did everything to do it. No, he had no help in those Back to Godheads. So he was in Delhi, he was trying to distribute his books, he had a heat stroke, he fainted in the street. One of his friends found him and took him to the hospital. Another time he got gored by a cow, and he was lying on the side of the road for some time before anybody even found him and took him to hospital. So the hunger, the cold, this Delhi can be either really, really hot, 114 degrees, or very cold. So he didn't have facilities to take care of his body, but he didn't mind. And he later said, "These difficulties were assets. It was all Krishna's mercy." So in the 50s, the late 50s, he moved to Vangsi Gopal Temple in Vrindavan. And when he was in Vrindavan, he was so blissful. He would go every day to the Jamuna, take bath in the Jamuna, just relishing being in Vrindavan and having such a simple life. And he was writing, and by day he would go up to Delhi to do his printing and come back because he didn't really have anywhere to stay in Delhi. So I'd like to just read a little bit from your ever well-wisher. So he was relishing his time in Vrindavan, and yet he was thinking, why shouldn't people all over the world have this? This is the abode of peace, but nobody knows anything. Nobody's interested. But this is what they're actually hankering for. So he was working constantly at the time on his Bhagavad Gita. One time he wrote a poem, I'm sitting alone in Vrindavan Dham. In this mood I'm getting many realizations. I have my wife, sons, daughters, grandsons, everything, but I have no money, so they are a fruitless glory. Krishna has shown me the naked form of material nature. By his strength, it has all become tasteless to me today. And then he quoted that quote, I gradually take away all the wealth of those upon whom I am merciful. It's in Srimad Bhagavatam. He said, how am I able to understand this mercy of the all-merciful? Everyone has abandoned me, seeing me penniless. Wives, relatives, friends, brothers, everyone. This is misery, but it gives me a laugh. I sit alone and laugh. In this Maya Samsara, whom do I really love? Where have my loving father and mother gone now? Where are my elders who were my own folk? Who will give me news of them? Tell me who. All that is left of this family is a list of names. So that was his mood when he was alone in Vrindavan. And then one night he had a really striking dream, and he saw Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in his beautiful saffron clothes, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was motioning, come, 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 come now. And he was actually telling him to take sannyas. And 3 times Srila Prabhupada had a dream of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta coming and telling him to take sannyas. So at the time he was thinking that would be horrible. And there's one lecture he said, I was thinking, oh, it'd be horrible, give up my children. He said, and now I have so many wonderful children. So he was thinking about this, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta telling him to take sannyas, and he connected with his respected godbrother Pragyan Keshav Maharaj in Mathura. And when he asked him, what do you think? He said, you must take sannyas. So along with 2 others, Srila Prabhupada took sannyas, and that was in 1959 in Mathura. So he then obtained a room in Chippiwada in the early 60s. So he had 2 people tell him, why are you just writing magazines? You know, people read a magazine and toss it. Why aren't you writing books? There was a librarian who said it, and there was also a soldier, a military man who said it to him. So Srila Prabhupada took it that this is Krishna's desire, and he started to meditate. And what's the greatest scripture? He had already been working on a commentary on Bhagavad Gita, but he was thinking Srimad Bhagavatam is the greatest scripture. And he was projecting, oh my gosh, this is going to take years, 60 volumes, it'd be at least 60 volumes. But he started with all his characteristic determination. And he sat down and he started Srimad Bhagavatam. So this was a whole another step up to get books printed. So he took this room in Chippiwada. And it's actually a temple. And they actually purchased and opened the temple. And it's a wonderful story how they Gopal Krishna Maharaj pursued that temple for like 12 years to try to buy it, because he asked Prabhupada, should we buy that Chippiwada temple? And Prabhupada said, if you get it at a good price. So in 2014 it was opened. And I have to say that the deities there are very beautiful. Their name is Radha Ballabha, and when I saw those deities, I thought, I know why Prabhupada called the Radha Ballabha deities in Melbourne Radha Ballabha. It's kind of striking. You know, they're not the same in the proportion or anything, but the expressions are very much Radha Ballabha. And I was also speculating that Srila Prabhupada called Radha Govinda in Calcutta, our Calcutta temple, Radha Govinda, because he worshipped Radha Govinda in Calcutta. I don't know, we'll never know, but they're very beautiful deities. And Srila Prabhupada sometimes did some deity worship. If the pujari didn't come at night, Prabhupada himself would do the artik. So he would be there and he would be in Vrindavan. So he would come to print his books, and once again, a lot of privation. He was very poor. But he needed this for credibility for his preaching. He knew that sannyas and having books were interlinked. Taking sannyas, having books were interlinked with his mission to go and preach. Then he moved, in Vrindavan, he moved to Radha Damodar Temple. So he had Jiva Goswami's beautiful deities there of Radha Damodar, and also when he would cook and eat outside the lattice, the sort of stone lattice of his kitchen area, he could look at Rupa Goswami's samadhi. So this gave him great inspiration to be able to look at Rupa Goswami's samadhi. So I wanted to read something from that time. This is Hridayananda Babaji Maharaj, and he was a pujari in Radhakund and had been a pujari for 78 years when this interview was taken. And he lived next to the Radha Damodar temple. So he says, Prabhupada spread this Krishna consciousness by the mercy of Rupa Goswami. Prabhupada used to pray to Rupa Goswami, please give me your mercy. And then he got that mercy. I know this because I saw some of the things he did at Radha Damodar temple. My room is still located in the same place as it was then in 1964 or 5. Many times in the middle of the night at midnight or 1 or 2 in the morning, I would hear a voice crying from inside the courtyard by Rupa Goswami's samadhi. The voice was calling out and crying, but I did not know what it was because I was trying to take rest. But one night, on the full moon, I heard that voice again. So I climbed up to the roof of our house and looked down into the Radha Damodar courtyard. I saw something very amazing. Srila Prabhupada was sweeping the courtyard of Rupa Goswami's samadhi. He was bending down with a small broom, and as he swept the ground by the samadhi, he was crying out, Hey Rupa, Hey Sanatan, Hey Gurudev, please give me your mercy. Without your mercy, I cannot do anything. Give me your mercy, give me the strength that I may fulfill your orders. Then I realized that it was he who almost every night was calling out as he was sweeping like this. So once again, begging for the mercy. So Srila Prabhupada, in order to get those books done, he did his own editing, of course, proofreading, typing, everything. There were some devotees at Chippiwada would sometimes, in the afternoon after work, they would help him to do some typing. And, carry paper and things to the printers. But mainly he did everything alone. So he went to Gorakhpur to Hanuman Prasad Podar, who was a great exponent of printing religious books, for his first donation for the first printing. Second one, he met the Prime Minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri, and he gave a book to him, and that was snapped. A picture was snapped, and he used that. And also, this Prime Minister wrote and said, our government agency should take your books. So by selling books, he got enough to print number 2. And then for number 3, he went to Bombay, and Lalanath Prabhu was reading the other day with many tears how Srila Prabhupada got that third donation from Sumati Morarji. He was also begging to go on her ship to America. She was refusing. Oh, you're an old man, you can't do that. Preach in India. And Srila Prabhupada insisted until she finally gave him passage. So the effort to get the visa, the P form, etc., was the no objection certificate was incredible. So I wanted to read one more quote from this friend to all about Srila Prabhupada begging for the mercy to go to America. So this devotee is the Pujari from Sri Advaita Acharya's house in Shantipur. And he was a Pujari there from the 40s, 50s and on. So he used to notice that a Grihastha Bengali devotee used to come to the temple quite regularly, dressed in white khadi, dhoti and kurta, and he always came alone. He would sit in the back of the mandir without speaking. He would chant Harinam on his mala very quietly and deeply. I noticed that he came on the weekends, usually once a month, in a regular way. After chanting there for many hours, he would always thank me when he left. His presence was profound, and I became attracted to him. Since his devotion was solitary, I never spoke to disturb him. Sometimes I happened to notice that while he was chanting, his eyes would be full of tears and his voice would be choked up. Then for a long time he did not come. However, I directly recall that in August of 1965, I saw a saffron cloth sannyasi sitting in the back of the mandir. In a moment, I recognized him to be my old friend. Again, he sat for a long time chanting Hare Krishna. I could see his beads moving, his eyes closed in concentrated devotion. He was weeping unabashedly, even more than he used to previously. Finally, as evening came, he paid his Dandavat Pranams for a long time. When he arose, he came and again thanked me for my seva here at Advaita Bhavan. I asked him, "Who are you? I remember you from long ago." He replied, "My name is Abhay Charanarvindam Bhakti Swami Maharaj. I am an unworthy of his disciple of his divine grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, my divine master. I have been coming for such a long time because my Gurudev has given me an impossible mission. His desire was for me to cross the His desire was for me to go across the ocean into the Western countries and spread the sublime teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There are countless souls who have never heard of Shri Radha Krishna and they are suffering greatly. I have not known how this mission of his will be successful, so I have been coming here to this special house of Advaita Acharya, where he, Nityananda and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would gather together to plan the Sankirtan movement. It was here that they launched the inundation of love of God that swept India and continues to this day. Thus, I have been praying very earnestly here that they will give me their mercy and somehow they will empower me and guide me. I want to satisfy my Gurudev's desire, but I am feeling unqualified to do this." As he was speaking to me, I saw tears falling down on his cheeks again. Then he continued, "Tomorrow I am leaving for Calcutta to go upon a ship across the ocean to America. I do not know what will befall me there, but I am praying most earnestly here for help." Then he very humbly asked me for my blessings. I was indeed moved by this Vaishnava sincerity and determination as I watched him depart upon his journey. So a few years later, he noticed that some white devotees were there with dhotis and kurtas, and they would come to the Advaita Bhavan and they were chanting on japa. And he was like, "Oh wow," didn't think much. And then one of them gave him a back to Godhead. And he opened up the back to Godhead. He saw this picture, Founder Acharya, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And he was just amazed he'd done it. So, thank you so much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.